Thank you, Barry, to the principal and honored guest here, and to Carol Moore, a good friend of mine, and to you kids. I want to tell you that I'm a retired newspaper reporter now, but I continue to write and continue to read. When I started out as a kid, just like you, in school, my mother read to me. And it set, I didn't understand that there were other worlds out there until my mother started reading to me. I lived in a little small place called Cedartown, Georgia, and it was a mill village. It was a cotton mill town. And my father worked in a cotton mill, just like some of your ancestors worked in coal mines. My father worked in a cotton mill, which is sort of similar. We lived in a house that we didn't own. The mill owned the house. So my mother read to me. And it opened up brand new worlds for me. And I knew once I got old enough, I wanted to do something that could capture my imagination and I could use my imagination. So I started reading. And I read a lot of biographies, just as a kid. I read about Thomas Jefferson. He had one of the largest libraries in the world at the time. Then I read about George Washington. You've read George Washington. You know who George Washington was. He was a surveyor. And I read about John Adams and his wife Abigail Adams. And they were great writers and readers. And they wrote all these letters back and forth to each other for years and years. And now you can read those letters. And I read those letters. Then I read about Albert Schweitzer, a doctor who went to Africa to help people. And I read about George Washington Carver, who worked with the peanuts so you could have peanut oil today and peanut butter. On and on. I read everything I could get my hands on as a kid coming up. And then I got interested in the Civil War, since I grew up in a little Georgia town. And I read about a fellow by the name of Thomas Jackson. Any of you ever heard of him? You have, great. Stonewall Jackson. And today on VMI, that's Virginia Military Institute, there are these words. You can be whatever you resolve to be. So I resolved to be, when I read that, I thought, here was this great general in the Civil War. And he resolved to be, to self-educate himself. He was an orphan. And he came up a very difficult life. And he rose up, became a general, became a world famous general. You can be whatever you resolve to be. I resolved to be a writer. I wanted to write. And let me tell you, reading has taken me to new worlds, and then it transported me to other worlds. I've been to Europe, to Asia. I've been to Old Siam. I've visited churches that are 800 to 1,000 years old, and in Asia, I visited a church, a temple that was 2,500 years old. Reading did that. I read about the stories before I ever left, and I wanted to write about the stories after I got back. So reading has been a huge part of my life. I can't live without reading. And I want you to understand how much reading will lift you up and take you to other places, and eventually one day you can go to these places on your own, either in books or in person, just like I've done. I came up out of a mill village. I was the only child in my family to graduate from college, to even go to college. I always knew I wanted to do something with my life, and I want you to do something with your lives, because the opportunity is there, and it's there in books. Never stop reading. I read 4 or 5 books a week still today. It's the most joy I have in this life, and I want you to have that joy. It is wonderful. It tells you so much history. I followed history in Europe, the World War I that you'll learn about one day. I walked those same paths that those soldiers walked, fighting that war. But before I ever left, I had already read the history about what happened. So reading is a way for you to not only learn, but to enrich your life forever. And I want you to do me a favor. I want you to be great readers. It'll expand your mind, and it'll expand your heart. Thank you, Barry.